argument, we have proof that the environment our communities are living in are unhealthy, and COVID is the magnifying glass of that reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Becca?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. Great. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Becca Wilson, Executive Director of the Boston Cyclists Union. Thank you so much for chairing this meeting, for everyone who sponsored, and for everyone else who's here listening and asking great questions. I want to say that I spoke at the listening session back in September and shared a statement that the Boston Cyclists Union wrote, and I'll make sure that all counselors have access to that afterwards. A lot of what I'm going to say is in that statement as well. So, and I also want to thank the Friends of Melania cast. They've really been leading this conversation and invited us into it several times. So our office used to be close by on Dudley Street near Blue Hill Ave. This is a corridor that I would have biked, that many people would bike, and I'm involved from the bicyclist perspective, and also pedestrian access and safety and access for all. We've been currently the two-way bike path on the northeast side of the corridor is not comfortable. I don't use it. Many people choose not to use it, but a significant reason is that there are tree roots coming through the path that, if you're riding along, would eject you pretty high into the air. And that's something that could be improved by rehabbing the existing path, not digging up the entire corridor, cutting down so many mature trees, and creating a new path on both sides that just isn't needed. So as far as the bike facilities are concerned, I want to be very clear, speaking on behalf of the Boston Cyclists Union, our members, people who bike, the bike community is not standing up and saying, we need this project to go forward and need it to go forward as is for bike access. There's never been unanimous consent around whether there should be a path on each side or one path on one side. There are destinations on both sides with tropical foods, Orchard Garden School, and kids who do bike there, lots of housing on the other side, and a path there could open up access, for people who don't want to cross the street. But however, we said from the beginning, if you're going to put a path on both sides, each one should be two-way, so people don't have to cross multiple times. And so for the city to go from one two-way path to two one-way paths never made sense to us. And we continually voiced this concern, and it was never addressed. And what the city continually said with this design is that it was a compromise plan. But I think the compromises that are being made are too many and are for the wrong reasons. And we've continued to uplift the ask by the community to save the trees. And along with improving the bicycle safety and bike facilities, again, Chief Osgood showed this is a very dangerous corridor for all road users. It's a high crash corridor for pedestrians and for motorists. And yet the fact that the city is using the language that a tree hearing is not required, but they're making a concession to allow it because this is formally a street widening project, is counter to all Vision Zero principles. Making a street wider makes it more dangerous, so it just doesn't make sense. You can still table the intersections at Albany and Washington. You can still raise the crosswalks and can still improve sightlines without straightening the corridor, without widening the corridor, and without cutting down all of these mature trees. I want to just talk a little bit about street projects and tree removal. Mela already brought up the amazing example of the uproar that would ensue if the city ever proposed to remove even a single tree in Back Bay along the Comm Ave Mall. Another project example, the Arborway in Jamaica Plain, is being redesigned for safety for all road users. And at the start of that project, which is being run by the state, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, it's been widely said, we know that saving trees is a top priority, and we will avoid removal of a single tree at all costs. The difference with the Melania Cast project in 2011, when it started, 400 trees were going to be cut down. In 2014, when the city came back with a revised plan, 240 trees were going to be cut down. And through the process, when the city made concessions and compromises, when that number became 62, the city, basically was able to gaslight the community and say, we were going to take down 240. We're only taking down 62 now. You should be happy with this result. And then I just want to say that the community is exhausted by process, and there have been so many meetings that people just don't understand how what they mean, how they transpire. In November of 2018, there was a 25% design hearing that proposed removal of 62 trees. People were told this is much better than 240, but then since November of 2018 to now, somehow that number doubled to 120. The last thing that I'll say is the NEPA approval, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, which is submitted to review the environmental impact of the project, was submitted at the 25% design hearing, which only included removal of 62 trees. So the environmental impact was analyzed at the removal of 62 trees, which has now gone up to 120. So appreciate the council calling this hearing, listening to everyone, and really doing everything to stop the removal of these trees and listening to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. Next on my list was Stacy.
Thanks, Councilor, and thanks to the council for holding this meeting. I am also going to try to be brief tonight. And I would just say, I am the executive director of Livable Streets. We do not represent the community. We are not leading this project. The community is leading this project, and they're all here tonight to tell you what's going on. I'm here with my hat as an advocate, and I want to sort of focus on, I think, some of the patterns and some of the process issues, and maybe ask some hard questions, but also suggest some paths forward, not just for this project, but for how the city does all kinds of projects like this moving forward. Livable Streets, through the leadership of our founding board member, Ken Krockemeyer, has been part of this process in many different ways over the last 10 years. So one of my projects tonight was to go through memos starting in 2011. And so I pulled up the first memo, which was available on the city's website, that tells you what the community said in 2011. And what it says in this memo is that the current planning effort is taking place against a backdrop of increased development, and that there is concern about that. So where is the BPDA? Where is the focus on displacement? We've known this is a problem since, again, 2011. It's documented in the city's documentation on the website. One of the key ideas that came out of this meeting was to develop a set of early action steps that the city could take, including snow removal, maintenance, cleaning, traffic calming. Where are the early action items from 9 years ago, 10 years ago at this point? Top bullet point from the list of a successful Melania Cast Boulevard would be a beautified and improved landscaping, mature trees kept. That is the top request from the community in this memo, again, on your website. And then goes into maintenance, snow removal, litter consistently removed, safe biking and pedestrian, a lot of just very basic improvements. And so I bring this up to say, I think it's good to hear that there will be another meeting, but as Becca has expressed, there is a decade of documentation where community members have made very clear, direct, achievable asks, and I think it's really important to do some of that work ahead of the next meeting. So, what's the snow removal plan based on the feedback this year to make sure people can cross the road? If the city is going to move forward with some of these design options, can we use the Healthy Streets initiative that has been very successful in downtown Boston to show the community what you mean by traffic calming, experiment, test? What are the things we can do that actually speaks to the feedback that has already been received, responds, and demonstrates what you're trying to do. That all seems very reasonable, achievable, and aligned with what you've already been asked for. A second thing that I just want to highlight and come back to, because it's the question of funding. It hasn't actually been clarified tonight if the city is planning on moving forward with using the state and federal funds and how that impacts the design. One thing that has happened through the process is that we've heard over and over again, well, it has to get through a mass dot approval, so we can't do this or we can't do that. Do we need to use this money? Or I'm not saying we don't need the project. As we've seen, we have a floodplain issue. We need to deal with heat island issues, and we need to deal with safety. But do we need this money, and do we need to go through this process? And it's unclear to me what the city's approach is, and I think that's really important to understand before we go into the next meeting. And maybe there's clarity tonight. And I'm going to put this up against the Northern Avenue Bridge project, because my understanding is that we are actually giving up $10 million of federal funding in order to move that bridge forward. And that's $100 million of city funds, flexible city funds. So we do have precedent in a white wealthy community to spend lots of money to do what I don't want and what most people don't want, but to do something, and to give up money. And I could be wrong. I'm happy to be corrected. So where is that flexibility for Melania Cass? Where is that we have the resources, we don't need the state, we're going to be strategic? I think that folks would like that clarity. I would love that clarity. And just to say, I think that we need to understand what the actual intersectional approach is going forward. I know that for many years, I was going back, there were notes from 2017 where friends were saying, can you please bring the Parks Department in? Can you please bring your peers in? And there was pushback internally. So I know you all are meeting internally, but who is the intersectional team that is going to deal with displacement, going to deal with environment? Who makes decisions? And about what? And can the public have that understanding before the next public meeting? I'm done with my process lecture. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone who has been doing this for more than a decade. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stacey. That was really important. Ken. Hold on, I'm double checking my screen. Sorry. Now we can hear you. Go ahead,
You
Ken.
can hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Hi, this is Ken Krookemeyer. I'm a resident of the South End. I've been involved. I was asked to join Friends of Melania Cass at the very beginning because I was there with the neighborhood when the plans were made to plant 1,194 trees along Melania Cass Boulevard, where to locate it, where to put in the new housing, where to put the industry, where to do all of the things that make what is there today. Is it perfect? No. Does it need to have trees removed in order to make it better? Absolutely not. I think that's the really important point that needs to be made clear to the chiefs, who I think are still waffling on what's going to happen going forward. Stacey pointed this out, and it is really important that the council know, that everyone in the neighborhood know that the trees are not coming out, the project is not going forward, and that we are going to start a new process that will take the vision that Ivana Lyer and many others in Lower Roxbury have been pushing, which is the idea of a greenway that becomes a positive center of focus of activity along Melania Cass Boulevard, and that will coalesce the various pieces of the city, the trees, the maintenance, the snow plowing, all the other things that have to happen to take care of that boulevard, and will coalesce the neighborhood in being involved in all those decisions and all of the work that has to do to keep the boulevard as being the center of Lower Roxbury. That neighborhood was cut in half by the plans to build the expressway, and it is essential that the legacy from now 40 years ago to plant those trees be enhanced rather than torn apart, in allowing the neighborhood to regroup as an important part of this city in all the possible ways for the health of its residents and so forth. We haven't remembered the history of how we got to that tree planting very well in thinking about public participation. And to answer the questions that Councilman Janey has asked, that Councilor Asabi George has asked about how we can move forward. I want to remind people of the process that was used in the Southwest Corridor, where the meetings were held monthly with each of the different neighborhoods and as a joint meeting of all of the neighborhoods to make decisions in public about the development of the project. They were made by consensus, and they were done under a memorandum of agreement that was signed at the very beginning that said, all these folks will be involved and they will be there. If you're not there, you are not going to be heard. That also meant that the city had to be there. That also meant that the public agencies had to be there. That means that the consultants had to be there. That means that the neighbors had to be there and the advocates had to be there. And if they weren't there, then their voice was not going to get heard in the decision that was going to be made. And so it required everybody to be involved, and it required them to all agree, which meant that everyone had to listen to everybody else. The neighbors had full ability to be persuasive about the things that concerned them. And the engineers, quite rightly, had an opportunity to be persuasive about the things that they were trying to care for that were part of regulations or state law or whatever else it was. The funding had to be there. It had to all fit together. We're being told now that this is going on, and maybe the chiefs will be ready to talk to the neighborhood sometime this winter. What's been going on since that announcement was made in August? I think we need to know. We need to understand how this process is actually going to involve people. The people who are there, the people who know the things that need to be known in order to design the right project. If they'd been listened to in 2011, we wouldn't have spent $4 million of city money doing this design that has gotten us to a point where we shouldn't be proceeding. We will have wasted that money. We will have wasted that time and energy, not only of the engineers and the city administrators, but of all the neighbors who've been fussing with this thing for all that period of time. Let me get to the point of, do the trees need to be cut in order to get safety? Because we keep hearing that. We have to cut down the trees in order to achieve the safety goals of the project. It's absolutely not true. And if the engineers had listened, they would know that that's true. The points, there are 3 points to talk to. The 2 one-way bike paths, I think Becca has covered that quite well, because you wouldn't choose to put a bike path right next to a roadway when you've already got one that's farther away and so forth. I won't go through those details. The protected intersection design, which is required by the nature of these 2 one-way bike paths, has not convinced the neighborhood that it's going to be any safer to get across from one side of Lower Roxbury to the other. In fact, the distances are increased enormously. Currently 55 feet to get from curb to curb becomes 93 feet to get from the height of the sidewalk to the height of the sidewalk on the other side of the road, having gone down to the street level, cross the bike path, through an island, cross the street, through another island, cross the bike path, and then back up to the sidewalk on the other side. The time that it'll take to do that is longer than the full cycle of walk and flashing don't walk that is given. It doesn't even meet the state's, the national standards, MUTCD, for crossings. How can that be safer? And you'll have to push a button, which was promised that you wouldn't have to push a button, but the traffic engineers took it out. There's so many examples of how this protected intersection is not going to work, is not going to be maintained. It has puddles if you look at it on Commonwealth Avenue Phase 2. It just is a mess. And so why are we spending all this money to create the mess? To believe that they're going to be able to lay asphalt within 1/8 of an inch tolerance in order to keep it so it will drain properly. It won't. Finally, the road will be safer if the traffic moves slowly, more slowly. Everybody agrees on that. And yet, there is nothing in the design that couldn't be done within the existing curbs and without cutting a single tree. So if they're going to have new traffic signals, if there's going to be automatic recall, if there's going to be a 20-mile-an-hour progression, safety at Orchard Garden School, they should be installing the required slowing the traffic by the school, and yet they haven't even put that in the project, believe it or not. The curb radii could be made sharper as the neighborhood requested. They haven't done that. Albany